Imagine this. What if every bridge were built without blueprints? What if every symphony was composed without sheet music? What if every plane was flown without a flight plan? Sounds absurd, right? Because we instinctively know that very complex things need structure. Yet every day in business, in meetings, presentations, conversations, we attempt to build understanding without structure. We start talking before we've even designed how we want the story to unfold, which often leads to confused audiences, missed opportunities, and messages that don't land. That's why frameworks are so powerful. Frameworks provide a blueprint that helps to logically connect ideas, helps to separate the nice to haves from the must haves, and helps make your message really clear and easy to follow and hard to forget. Hello and welcome to PowerSpeaking Live. I'm Carrie Beckstrom, the host of this monthly series and the CEO of PowerSpeaking Incorporated. Today, we're going to explore a variety of best practice frameworks and other tools that can be applied in a whole host of situations, from the more formal high-stakes presentations to everyday spontaneous conversations. And joining us today for this discussion are two expert facilitator and coaches who have a wealth of knowledge to share on this topic. First up, I'd like to introduce Deb Eliprandi. After spending a rich career leading communication and marketing teams in a variety of financial institutions in Latin America, Deb made the decision to transition to a facilitator and executive coach. And in this capacity, she helps professionals build confidence and amplify their impact. I love that expression, Deb, amplify their impact. Who doesn't want to amplify their impact? It's a delight to have you here. When I first met you, I was instantly drawn to your warm, inviting personality and how generously you share your expertise. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
Also joining us is one of our very own facilitator and coaches, John Warren. John has a very distinguished designation at PowerSpeaking in that he was our very first contract facilitator, which means that John has been contributing his expertise to this organization and our clients for over 30 years and is still going strong. One of John's many distinguished accomplishments is this brilliant, impeccably timed idea he had to present a business case using one of our proven frameworks, of course, to our previous owner, Mary McGlynn, and me. And his ask was to switch to doing virtual delivery only. Now, I personally felt after decades of traveling the globe on behalf of Power Speaking that that he had more than deserved that opportunity. But John, of course, included a number of business benefits that made the case even more compelling. His ask was granted. What was uncanny about this was the timing. John made this pitch in late 2019, just months before the world shut down due to the coronavirus. So we were very fortunate to have someone who had a lot of experience and savviness in terms of virtual delivery at the helm as we navigated that turbulence. So, welcome, John. It's a delight to have you here. And I will do my very best to avoid looking at you or Deb, and as much as I want to, and look at the camera. John is regularly coaching me on the fact that I tend to deviate from doing that. So, how am I doing so far, John?
You're doing great, Carrie. Thanks.
All right. Wonderful to have you here. And also to our audience, we're thrilled that you're part of this conversation. We invite you to pose your questions in chat and also your advice and recommendations. So let's start off the conversation by John, you sharing in your experience, which is vast, the biggest difference when presenters use some sort of structure or framework to guide their presentation versus those that don't.
Well, Carrie, thanks for that. For me, when I'm in an audience and a presenter announces their structure or their agenda up front, I can feel myself relax because I know they have a plan and they've taken the time to get organized. I hope for their benefit, definitely for my benefit. And we get this feedback all the time. In our presentation skills class, by following a framework, people get better retention of their message and action that is called for at the end of the plan. And in our speaking up class, it helps executives focus quicker and make better decisions. So in my experience, good frameworks produce a wide range of good outcomes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Way to set the stage. Uh, Deb, often we get pushback, not often, but when we get pushback in terms of the idea of using frameworks, often from people that say they like to wing it, they want to be very extemporaneous, and they associate frameworks with being too rigid. What advice or what do you have to say when that is a concern?
Oh, absolutely. And I love that question and that point because it's actually the biggest misconception. Frameworks are there to help you. They're there to be like your roadmap or let's think of it as a cheat sheet and you know what you're going to say next. So science actually backs it up because when having a structure, when having a sequence that you're able to follow, you're actually freeing up brain power so you can dedicate more of your attention to your examples, to your stories, and to the personal details you're going to bring from your experience into the structure that is already there. So, in my experience, and this is what I hear from many clients, when you have a framework, instead of being rigid, you actually just have a map to aid you, to help you, not have to worry too much about what to say next, but just populate some of those frameworks with your own ideas. So that gives you freedom, actually.
It absolutely gives you freedom and it makes you much more capable of truly being in the moment and reading the verbal and nonverbal cues you're getting from your audience and flex and adjust depending on the signals that you're getting. So, it actually, as you said, provides you quite a bit of flexibility and having that mental roadmap in your mind also makes it much easier to navigate the discussion and not be in your head concerned about what do I need to say next versus focusing on what you're getting from your audience. I love Matt Abrahams. He's a well-known podcaster of Think Smart, Talk Fast. He has a book of the same name, a Stanford professor. He actually says that in order to be spontaneous, you need structure, which sounds conflicting, but it's actually very true based on what you said. All
Yeah,
right.
and just becomes on that, Carrie, sorry if I may. That's one of the things that I should probably mention to the audience. We can use frameworks both for structuring a full presentation. Let's say you have 30 minutes, an hour to present, and you can have a planned presentation, but they also work for like 30 seconds when you have to give a quick answer or provide a quick project update. And in that sense, Matt's book has a lot of resources. So for the audience, if you're interested, there are many of those that you can just pull and use when you need those answers on the spot.
Absolutely. He even has a framework for small talk. For people that just dread small talk, find it just agonizing and difficult, lean on frameworks. So, John, can you build on this? Talk a little bit more, a little more about why it is that frameworks provide you flexibility to adapt in the moment.
Well, I'll give you a specific example, Carrie. In our presentation skills class, we build a talk around a core message. That's like the keel of a ship. It keeps me on track. So if something comes up that takes me off track, when I respond to that, I can get back on track a lot quicker for me and also help the audience refocus. And connected to that, one of our colleagues and dear friends, Ralph Walter, who's based in Germany, said when he's preparing for a major presentation, he will make a list of at least 20 questions that he would anticipate from the audience. And by focusing more effectively on the audience in advance, when something comes up, I'm not startled. I can go there, work with that, and then bring me back to the central keel, which ultimately I think serves the audience much better.
Absolutely. Such a concrete, relevant example. And we even have frameworks for how to effectively respond to questions.
We do.
We do. What would be an example, John?
Well, there are two that I like to play with. One is called the PrEP model, and we like acronyms, and many of our clients live in a sea of acronyms. So PrEP is for position, reason, evidence, position. So if I want to make a case, if it's a formal thing, my position is, or our company's position is, and then I have the reason and evidence, and then finish the answer by restating the position, which has two benefits. It's a nice clean period at the end of the answer. Sometimes it's not that I don't know what to say, I don't know how to stop. And having a restatement of the position is good for reinforcement and a nice clean ending. A slight variation of that is an Oreo cookie, which I enjoy. And now I change the P to opinion. So I'm not as locked in. It's a better for me discussion response, in my opinion, same filling, the reason and the evidence. So again, this is my opinion. And if I have the model prepared, I can then flex with the actual wording. This is what I think because, for instance, so again, this is my opinion. Having those two helps give a real clean, concise answer to almost any question, except if I ask you where you live. It's not an opinion question. You know where you live, answer the question.
Well, in my opinion, yeah, that's true.
Mm.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Um, Dad, can you recall a moment when a framework completely transformed how someone communicated, maybe even changed the outcome?
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the greatest examples I have come from feedback conversations. As you know, for many people, feedback conversations can feel weird. In fact, studies show that feedback skills are one of the biggest gaps for managers in our reality. So, when you have a structure to follow, that conversation can go from weird to something productive and really adding value to what the conversation is supposed to do. So one of the great frameworks that I have for feedback is SBI, as situation, B, behavior, I, impact. It's well known and many people use it. But what I like to do with SBI is sandwich it with a question. So usually start with a micro yes question, like, do you have a minute that I can share some feedback with you? Or is it okay if we touch on your performance during the meeting or something like that? And then we go into SBI. And then for a situation, you have to be very specific, talk about the behavior in a very descriptive way and the impact that had in the situation. And then you wrap it up with a question. So how does that sound? Does that resonate? And this has happened with many of my clients, but I have this example of someone who had he had a great team player in his team, but every time they would go into a meeting with a client, he was jumping in, he was interrupting the client, he wouldn't let the client finish because he was so eager to jump in and contribute. So this client of mine, he used this structure to address that situation with one of the people in his staff, and he reported having a much more productive conversation because the person didn't take it the wrong way. It was actually structured in a way that he could understand, oh, yes, absolutely. And thank you for giving me that buy-in. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to really see how that resonates.
Oh gosh, such a wonderful example. And to your point, it continues to be a significant gap and isn't done enough and effectively enough within organizations. And just as you shared, it can make a significant difference. It's a gift. You're wanting to help someone be even more effective. And I really like closing it with the ask because you're inviting them to come into the conversation and contribute to making a change. What about you, John? You have an
Well,
example?
Carrie, I have two. You already mentioned when I made a pitch to you and Mary McGlynn about wanting to be virtual. That was in November of 2019, before anybody had ever heard of the COVID virus. So when I asked to meet with the two of you virtually, and I used our presentation plan, our executive framework from the Speaking Up class. So I said, so my bottom line request is this, and the way it will positively impact the business is this. And I saw the two of you just start smiling because I was using our very own framework in order to make a presentation to you. I remember that day vividly. For one of our
As do
clients,
I.
yeah, great. We do a lot of work with Cisco engineers, and we encourage them to consider using their hobby or personal interest to help them explain a very technical idea. And initially, that kind of surprises engineers, most of whom are pretty left brain oriented. I was a math major, I understand that. But one of the women that I coached, she liked the idea. She used it at one of the Cisco conferences and scored the highest possible, got a score of 5 and a distinguished speaker award. By using an idea to bring her content to life, it made much better impact on the audience. So those are two examples that I remember very dearly.
Wonderful, wonderful, and I'm sure had greater impact and made it so much more memorable.
Yes. And always that's the
Yeah.
point. Make impact, make
Yeah.
it more memorable.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've given a little taste of some frameworks. Let's talk even more about specific frameworks for different goals. So, Deb, let's start with you. What's your go-to framework for people that need to effectively make status updates or deliver an executive briefing?
I really like a model that I call vision past next model. It starts like that. So instead of, because one of the greatest mistakes that happens is when you're asked for a project update, you can easily get into the details and go tactical and say, oh, now we need to do this. The next step is this. But instead of starting there, I would say start with the vision, start with what is the project's goal, right? Because this way you're more inspiring and you're actually starting with why. Why are we doing doing that. So you get everybody on the same page. And then you talk about a recent accomplishment. So the past relates to a milestone you've accomplished, or maybe an obstacle that you were able to overcome. And then you go into next. So what comes next? And now our next step is focusing on, and then A, B, or C. So I think it's a mix of let's say time frames and a little bit of some of the other frameworks, but it's a model that I like to follow for these cases.
Oh my gosh, I think that's so powerful for a number of reasons. I particularly love leading with the vision. For one, because as a project manager or someone who's deeply, deeply embedded in the project, you're very, very familiar with every aspect of it, but often your audience isn't. Uh, that's why you're there to deliver the updates. So, beginning with that context and that more visionary, inspirational component, why are we even doing this in the first place? I think is very effective because oftentimes also when you get really deep into a project, you lose sight of ultimately what is it we're trying to accomplish? What's the end game? What's the result that we want to yield from this? So always starting there, I think is just incredibly powerful and then the past and next. And to your point, I can see how that would be very effective in helping people that have a tendency to just get into the minutia, helps it keep it up at the right level. Great, great. All right, John, you already shared an example of this, but talk a little bit more about the go-to framework for really high stakes presentations where you're delivering to those senior leaders and some sort of decision needs to be made.
And Carrie, that's the bottom line. When a decision needs to be made, executives have told us literally without exception, different companies, different industries, get to the point quicker. One of them literally said, it's not a murder mystery. So in those senior level decision-making meetings, after just a simple act of courtesy to help them focus, I'm working on the premise, this presentation, as critical as it is to me, is one of many they're in the course of their day. So a quick sentence or two to focus on what we're here for, confirming the topic, and then right away, this is what I'm asking for, this is what I'm recommending, and this is how it will impact the business in a positive way. And then in these meetings, I don't give the agenda because that's a presentation. I propose an agenda for the for the discussion and then check with them. Does that sound appropriate? Is there anything else? So what I'm doing is setting up a framework for a discussion so I can answer their questions in the shortest amount of time to help them make the best possible decision. It's a very different mindset than giving them a presentation. I'm facilitating a discussion to focus on a specific business decision.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. So clearly articulated. You have had a little experience in
I
teaching.
like to practice what we preach, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Deb, how about uh, advice for people that want to share a compelling personal story or brand story? What framework do you find most effective for that purpose?
Yeah, and thank you for asking that. I actually love storytelling, and I think following this story arc is the most helpful thing you can do because people will get lost in stories as well. Sometimes you get, and then the story never ends, right? So having the framework and having the arc to follow is pretty helpful. What I think about as elements in the story arc, you obviously start in the past, then you zoom into the character or the situation just to make it more relatable and really get some reasoning for the audience to relate to your story. And then you build some tension, the main event, and then you're going to reach your epiphany, what you learned, what was the resolution of the story. And it works well because it also allows you to tell a story in a shorter way, both for personal brand stories, customer success stories, and all of that. So I would like to give an example if I can. I think it illustrates well. So there is one that I usually tell, which is Netflix story. It's a brand story. And you may know that Netflix started in the late 90s as a by mail DVD service. So you would get your DVDs by mail. And then a couple years later, they developed into a subscription model where you would get as many DVDs as you wanted, no late fees, not anything. And it was pretty successful. And then streaming came. And when streaming came, they had this decision. They said, should we continue to do what we are doing, or should we pivot to something so different? I mean, what we're doing is working. Why would we change it completely? And then they decided to listen to their clients, and their clients said, we need instant access to content. And they pivoted the whole business, and they became this giant streaming and even content producer that we have nowadays. So that's a very powerful lesson to learn. When you listen to your clients and you follow what they are telling you, you're eventually going to reach a more successful outcome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great. Thank you for sharing that example. And the kind of our go-to storytelling framework, also very similar to what you're saying, follows an arc. Uh, and it has a beginning with that brief context, so you can kind of set the stage. You then talk about the challenge, because you obviously want to introduce that tension, that conflict, the choice that is made based on that challenge and result. What was the impact, just like you're describing, or what lesson should I learn from this? John, talk a little bit about the framework you use, and I know you touched on this earlier, but let's revisit it. The framework you use when you need to share your point of view in a meeting.
Yeah, my personal bias is the Oreo cookie because I like them and it's easy to remember. I actually know that there are several of our colleagues who have a little Post-it note next to their camera with either the Oreo or the prep model, so they never have to think of their answer. They have to just fill in the blanks. The reason I like the Oreo model, it invites more discussion. So this is my opinion. The good news is if I have an opinion, I always have it for a reason. So the R pops out pretty quickly. And then if I can nail it down with an example or a specific piece of evidence, it makes it a little more concrete. And then by restating my opinion, I get the reinforcement value, but it also concisely and it ends the response. And I like that because it's easy for me to keep going. And I would rather give a concise answer and invite a follow-up question than try to give a long answer that may get lost.
Yeah, you just mentioned a key thing. Frameworks also are incredibly useful in helping us to communicate more concisely.
Yes.
And we all know that one's ability to communicate crisply, clearly, and concisely is essential in this environment in which we're just overloaded, and it's more and more difficult to, as Axios says, punch through the noise. And frameworks can help package that with punch.
Yes.
Uh, John, one other example. What about a framework within a framework? So, for example, have you um, coached clients on using one framework to structure your overall presentation, but then maybe a different framework to effectively integrate a story, a tight story into that broader presentation? What's your advice for that, doing that without it becoming overly complex?
Yeah. Thanks, Carrie. In our presentation skills class, when we're talking about evidence, evidence comes in two primary flavors. There's the analytical for the left brain, facts, number, data, research, statistics, and most presenters either have it or can readily look it up. By shifting to anecdotal evidence, analogies, metaphors, stories, it brings the data to life in a really powerful and memorable way. And particularly when I coach engineers who are so focused on the left brain, when I suggest, well, how would you explain that to a 10-year-old, which is a lesson I learned when I was taking advanced calculus many years ago, where the professor took a standard definition of a function, which is a one-to-one mapping of elements from the domain into the range, which means nothing to probably most people on this call. And then he gave us his definition even though he has a PhD in pure mathematics. A function is simply a box. You put one number at the top, turn the crank, and a different number pops out of the bottom. So he shifted from one to another. And by using that, I never forgot that. I used it when I taught high school math. I still use it when I'm explaining a complex idea to make it easily understandable. So inserting a brief story, and you gave the framework that we use within a longer presentation, again, makes the story clean, concise, focused to help make a point.
Terrific. Thank you. And I've heard you share that example, and I too, and I do not have the mathematical background and expertise that you have, and I too remember it to this day. I mean, you can picture it, you can visualize it, and it's so accessible to anybody can understand that. Yeah, I love that. But also, I think that's another point is frameworks, analogies, metaphors, stories, they help to make your message land, make it more accessible and relatable to your audience. Talking about making the message relatable to your audience, Deb, I know you have a wealth of global experience. What cultural considerations should we take into account when it relates to frameworks? So, in other words, are there certain frameworks that should be avoided in specific cultures, or do you find that frameworks tend to be universally applicable despite the culture area in the world?
Thank you for bringing this up, Carrie. Yes, I do love this question because I think I work with people all around the globe, and I myself, being a Latina, I do have I would say it's more awareness of the different cultural nuances that can influence the use of a framework. In my experience, frameworks do work in every culture as long as you respect their local nuances for sure. So let me give a few examples. Usually, what I hear from clients, Latinos like myself, or some other cultures that tend to speak more or sometimes tend to go into rambling, frameworks are very effective because, as you said, they make your message more concise. You're able to say what you want to say in a reduced way and more straight to the point. Whereas some other cultures, especially the ones that are more introverted, they also see the benefit in frameworks because they say, oh, at least I have a sequence to follow. At least I have a formula and I know what I have to say next. So, to that point of reducing anxiety about figuring out what you have to say and either being too straight to the point or too not straight to the point, frameworks will help in any way. And then, of course, if you are from a culture that truly values the stories, like we were saying, or the metaphors or something, you might spend a little bit more time in your story than in your logical evidence, but you're using the same structure, and that's going to help you anyway.
Terrific, terrific. And we are very sensitive to the fact that word choices, story types, examples, you need to carefully consider those to ensure that it's going to be relevant and understood by the particular culture. And my point is there's a lot of considerations in terms of how you want to make sure your message is received. So the framework makes it so much easier. You've got this framework, and it makes it easier to accommodate the different word choices, the different examples, the different stories, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Mhm.
I would love to hear from our audience. Please let us know. Do you have any questions that we can answer for you as it relates to this topic, or any advice that you'd like to share? John, you touched on this a little bit, but talk a little bit more about, or no, you've already talked. Have we? Yeah, we've talked about data heavy, technical.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right then. I think it's time for rapid fire.
Carrie, just before we do this, I want to jump back to something Deb just said about cultural awareness. One of our flagship programs now, Speaking Up, was originally named Speaking to the Big Dogs, which is a metaphor that kind of works in the US. But when we started teaching it internationally, people, what? You what? you have what kind of dogs in the US? So we realized even though it kind of worked in one country, it didn't expand globally. So we renamed it from speaking to the big dogs to speaking up, presenting to senior decision makers, which is much more globally understandable. Be
Great,
aware
great
always.
example.
Make every decision based on your audience, their background, their needs, their awareness. That's the ultimate foundation for any framework or good presentation.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, John, for bringing that up. And by the way, we always say communication is not about perfection, it's about connection. So you're not always going to get it right. Take the feedback, adjust. And we have a framework, amazing frameworks for feedback, as you pointed out so well, Deb. Building on John's point, what advice? And oh, thank you, Sola. We have a question. Could you go over the framework for project updates again?
Absolutely, yes. So it's if I would put it in the chat, it would be something like vision, past, next. That's kind of the formula that I follow. So the vision is your why, yeah. So let's give an example. I think it helps. So as you know, the goal of this project is to reduce onboarding time from 3 weeks to 1 week. Something like that. Even the mission can be something tactical if you're using a project that you're working on. And then you go to pass. So what we just learned is that training was taking too much time of our onboarding process. So we decided to reduce training, and we're working with a new training provider to make training fit into a week. And as a next step, what we are going to do, so there you go to the next, is we are going to test it with the new cohort, with our new hires cohort that is starting next week. And will see what lessons we can learn. But if it goes well, we are going to have our first proof of concept that 1 week is totally enough for our onboarding. So it goes more or less like that.
Excellent. And thank you for supporting that with an example. And you were able to do that so effectively on the spot. One, because you're very experienced with this, and two, because you have that framework to lean on. Great,
Exactly.
great way to show it. And Andrew, of course, turned it into an acronym, VPN.
I love it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question, Sola. So coming back to something you were getting at, John, Deb, can you provide advice for folks that are struggling with how do we determine what framework to use for what type of situation? Are there any specific questions or cues that you recommend?
Absolutely. I like to think of frameworks as building your communication tool belt. It's like you are going to learn all these frameworks. We have quite a few in the chat, and you're going to test them out. You're going to see what works for you in your realities, in your situation. I have had clients who have told me, "Oh no, this framework will never work for me because this is not the context where I work." So it can be specific to your line of work, to your job. But then once you pick one of those, start practicing. Use it. Use it in your next one-on-one meeting. Use it in your next team meeting and see how it goes. And then the more you perceive the benefit it will bring you, the more you're going to use it. So it's like, okay, so now I have this tool belt and I know which one to pull from. And by the way, I think for people who are able to get feedback, Carrie, as you were saying, the first time you try one of these, try with a family member or try with someone you trust and get their feedback. How am I doing? Do you think I structured it well? And then as you realize you're going to be doing it better and better, you will just want to keep doing it.
Great advice, and we provide that same exact advice. I'm thinking of Amy Ferber. She does such a brilliant job. She's one of our facilitators of modeling the prep framework with a conversation with her family, trying to convince them why we should go out for Mexican food versus pizza. I mean, it could be applicable in every aspect of your life. John, was there anything you wanted to add?
Well, related to that, one of the things I'm going to think about before any session, what's the purpose? What are we here for? And if it's to make a decision, even something as simple as which restaurant are we going to pick? Well, that's a decision-making presentation. So this is my recommendation because, So I'm talking about what I'm recommending and what the benefit would be. On the other hand, if I want people to remember something and act on it later, I'm going to choose a different plan. And that's the one that we teach in presentation skills. So it comes back always to who's the audience and what's the desired outcome. And then I pick the appropriate tool to help create that outcome.
Great, great. Such just clear advice, and of course, make it your own. Ensure it suits
Yeah.
your style. Yeah. And that is one of I love the analogy, Deb, of a toolkit. That's one of the beauties of frameworks is there's so many that you can choose from. And it helps to have, a small set in your back pocket, depending on the type of situation and the audience, as you said, John. Okay, so we are going to do rapid fire. And John, what's your go-to framework for clarity under pressure?
Well, part of it is always going to depend on the situation, how much pressure. When I was presenting to you and Mary, the pressure for me was pretty high because it was going to have an impact on my career. So I'm picking the speaking up framework because it was focused on getting a specific decision. On the other hand, if I'm in a meeting and the meeting is important, but I'm not running it, and I want to make a clear, compelling argument, I'll shift from the Oreo model to the prep model because I'm making a clear position statement and I want people to hear that and the reason behind it. So those are two that pop up to the surface of me in many situations.
Terrific. What about you, Deb?
Yeah, I have to echo John here. I go with PrEP. I think PrEP is the one is one of the most versatile frameworks we have, and it works in so many situations, as you were saying, from a conversation with your family to a meeting or even an impromptu situation. You were just called into a meeting and you need to jump in. You follow PrEP, and you're gonna sound very, very concise and really get your message there. So yeah.
Terrific. I'll just add a framework that has been a go-to one for me quite a bit lately, because I'm doing a lot of work with nonprofit organizations and helping volunteers to more effectively articulate an elevator pitch. So, talking about the essence of the organization's mission, why people should care, and try to inspire them to take action. It's a simple elevator pitch that starts with a problem because it's a persuasive framework. You want to lead with the problem. What's the solution? What's the benefit to the person you're talking about? And what's the call to action? And trying to make that call to action as clear and accessible and time-based as possible. And one of the things that was an awareness that came up in the moment, I was doing a workshop for about 25 volunteers at Canine Companions, just this incredible organization that raises and provides at no cost service dogs to people with disabilities. And I was asking at the beginning of the workshop, what's, if you get nothing else out of this time today, what's the number one thing you want to get out of this? And I was really surprised at the number of people that wanted advice on an exit strategy
Mhm.
because they're frequently walking around doing their day-to-day work with their service dog, and needless to say that attracts a lot of attention, and a lot of people stop them and want to understand, know more about the dog, etc. They obviously want to engage, however they want to do it uh, pretty crisply and be able to exit without being offensive. And that call to action helps them do that. It shifts it, it puts a, a a period on the end of the sentence and turns it to the person you're talking about. So here, take this card. I encourage you to look up Canine Companions and figure out ways in which you can get involved and make this organization even more successful. So I was thinking about you, John, with prep, how that enables you to bring a clear closing and invite the other person. A call to action can do that as well. All right, next one. Most underrated framework for everyday communication. Deb?
I would go with C. It's statement and then evidence and emotion. It's pretty much what John was explaining before, like using your analytical evidence and your anecdotal evidence. People don't do that a lot. People are sometimes, you do have your point and you do have your logical evidence to sustain it, but you don't go into the story or the metaphor or something like that. So I have a very good example here of a client that I was working with, and she was presenting in a town hall. It was like a company-wide town hall, and she had to talk about financial numbers, so revenue, profit, growth margin, and something like that. And she said, it's very easy for my management team to understand it. It's very easy for my finance team to understand it, but it's not so easy for the overall audience to understand it, because these concepts can be confusing for people who don't work in finance, for example. And then we came up with the analogy of a lemonade stand. So she was going to explain, when you sell a lemonade, is that revenue? Is that profit? How does that work? And she was very skeptical, Carrie, to use it, but she did. And after she did, she told me that she got a lot of compliments from the audience saying, thank you for being so clear. It was so easy to understand you. So really balancing those areas, that the ones that will satisfy your left brain, the ones that will satisfy your right brain, and really put it all together is one thing that is underrated and people should use more.
Oh, great. Great. Thank you. What about you, John?
Well, first of all, Deb, thank you for referencing again the left brain, right brain. The more we can keep the listeners engaged fully, the more they're going to appreciate that this was time well spent. Carrie, I love our presentation plan because it's counterintuitive. When people look at the plan, and we sometimes ask, it starts with an opening and works down to the action step, and we suggest turn it around. Begin with the end in mind. Start with the action step. What's the outcome you'd like to create? Move up a box. What's the core message? And that's an idea that I think is way underrated. If they could remember only one sentence from everything you had presented, what would you like that sentence to be? And once you know that, that becomes the keel that I mentioned earlier, around which you can very quickly develop a very effective presentation. I love that model.
A- Absolutely. I do too. I do too. And the elevator pitch that I was talking about, that's exactly how I worked with the volunteers. It's going to sound counterintuitive, but the first thing I want you to craft is your call to action. That doesn't mean you lead with your call to action, but in crafting that narrative, you start with that call to action. It's kind of like GPS. If you're going to a new place, what's the first thing you do? You plug in the directions, the destination that you're trying to go. GPS gives you the best possible path to get there. So by beginning with your call to action, you craft that narrative to ensure that you culminate with that step. Love it, love it. Okay, and audience, please feel free to share in your experience what's the most underrated framework. What is the one framework you wish every business professional used more often or understood? Deb or John, start with you.
All right. Well, for business professionals, we teach the the speaking up framework when you're presenting to senior staff. I think that can be much more effective at every level. We come together for a purpose. So if I lead and here's why it matters, particularly for technical people. There's a great model for technical presentation that's like a funnel. We start with the problem and we talk about all the data, the analysis, and we come up with a conclusion. How about we lead with the conclusion? This is what I'm recommending, and this is why. So it triggers a discussion. And I think if at every level in business, if that model were used, a lot more meetings would be a lot more effective.
Oh, completely, completely. And there's so many people with just really, really brilliant ideas. But if they're not able to com- communicate them in a clear, compelling way, it just doesn't land. Deb, you?
Yeah, I mine is actually I see Mark in the audience already listed the one that I was gonna say. So it's actually what, so what, know what. I think it's one that more business people should learn because again, it's so versatile and it's perfect for meetings, for events, for even casual updates. You state the facts, you explain why it matters, and then you suggest next steps. Done. So in less than a minute, in 30 seconds, and you're able to get so much into your message.
Awesome. Awesome. And thank you, Mark, for contributing that. Lonnie says, here's the one I'd love to help me get into a better listening mode rather than talking mode. Wait, why am I talking? Thank you so much for sharing that, Lonnie. Frameworks can also help you be a better listener, as Lonnie illustrates. All right, let's close. One tip for choosing the right framework for the moment. Deb.
Think of your audience. What does your audience want? What do they need? What do you want them to feel, to do, to think after they listen to you? And that's it. Just focus on
Golden rule. Be audience centric.
your
John?
yes.
Great. Exactly the same. If more people spent more time thinking about their audience before they ever open their computer and start creating slides, I think everybody would be a lot better served.
Ah, what a way to close, to put a pin on it, a bow on it. Thank you, John and Deb. This has been tremendously useful and great participation from the audience. We are going to close out by teeing up the topic that we'll be delving into next month. Talk about high stakes. Executive presentations are not one way. Part of effectively delivering an executive presentation is being able to artfully navigate the discussion. And that's what we'll be delving into next month. So please join us. Thanks again.